Hey everyone, this is Miss Smith, and the purpose of this video is for us to dive just a little bit deeper into ABC format as it pertains to our good news and our bad news writing assignments. So we've kind of covered ABC format already. We've discussed it in a previous week, but I wanted to create a video that shows you a little bit more about how to apply it for your specific writing assignments. And so what I have here is a document that is available to you on D2L. It's the ABC format guide for good news and for bad news writing. And so what you want to do is go back over this document very carefully and use it as you begin to craft those documents for these two assignments. Okay, so let's look at them one by one. We'll start with our good news writing. And so ABC format stands for abstract, body, and conclusion. And we're going to use ABC format for just about everything we do this semester. ABC format provides structure. That's the whole purpose of it. It provides structure for our communication. And so there'll be a lot of different types of formats we deal with this semester, but when you think ABC format, I want you to think structure, right? How your communication is structured. And so when I say structure, I mean what do you put first, what goes next, and what ends your communication, right? Kind of a beginning, middle, and end. And that's another way to think of ABC format. ABC stands for abstract, body, and conclusion. Okay, and that talks about how you begin, what's in the middle, and then what's at the end of your communication. And so when we're thinking about ABC format, we're thinking about how we structure our communication. Now, depending on the type of communication, we may have to apply ABC format a little bit differently. Okay, and so with good news writing, it is a form of direct communication, right? And you'll remember some of this from the readings in the textbook. This is a form of direct communication, so you never want to delay putting your reader in a good mood because you would be communicating good news. So with good news writing, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you begin with the good news. And you want to make sure then in your body paragraph that you include other details that would be useful for the reader to have. And then you always want to end with a goodwill closing. So we're going to take a closer look at it as it pertains to the good news writing assignment. So with the good news writing, for our scenario, you'll remember that we are writing to Mr. Saul Luciano, and Mr. Luciano owns a restaurant. And we're wanting to plan our class reunion banquet dinner at his restaurant. We want to hold it there. And so this is good news, right? Because we're trying to bring 100 plus people to his restaurant. This is great news. There's a lot of business that's coming his way. And so we want to begin that letter, begin that abstract paragraph with our 5W's information. Now, the 5W's include, we know this, right? Who, what, where, when, and why. Okay? Who, what, where, when, and why. Those are the 5W's. Sometimes how is added as a sixth question. And so the reason that we're going to begin with our 5W's in the abstract paragraph for our good news letter is because this is the type of information our reader will need most immediately. So think about it this way. You're writing a letter to Mr. Saul Luciano, and you're wanting to request to use his restaurant, to use a banquet room in his restaurant for a large event, a large gathering. When he gets your letter, one of the first things he's going to look for is the date and the time of your event, because he's probably going to stop reading as soon as he sees that information and go and check his calendar book to see if that date and time is even available. Okay, he's probably going to be a little bit anxious to get to that information. So remember, when we talked about our audience considerations, our audience, one of the considerations we have to make for our audience is that they are often impatient to find important information. Okay, they want to get to the important information right away. So we want to make sure as informed writers that we give him that important information right away. And so, first of all, if we think of the 5W's, you can begin with who. You can begin that first paragraph by introducing yourself, right? You can say, for example, I'm Denisha Smith and I am planning my class reunion, right? I'm just kind of going over some of the points here. Okay, so you want to look at back at your scenario to make sure you've got all the details. And I'm planning my event on whatever the date and time is. Make sure you include the date and the time, okay? And why you're writing. So you're writing this, of course, because you want to host your event at his restaurant, okay? And so I know these are only four of our 5 W's, but the where would be obvious, right? We will have already answered that. We want to host it there, right? And so you want to make sure then that you include this information in the abstract paragraph. What you also want to include in the abstract paragraph is the total number of guests you're expecting. So again, refer to the assignment scenario for that number. You don't want to say 50 attendees plus guests, okay? Because that's not a total number. You want to give a total number, right? A complete number so he will know how to plan. Okay, so that will take care of your abstract paragraph. Your body paragraph is where you want to include details. Okay, your body paragraph is where you want to include details. And so with your body paragraph, you want to begin with a lead-in sentence. And a lead-in sentence could be a really simple sentence that would end with a colon. So for example, I need to know the following information. Okay, that would be a really good lead-in sentence. And then you want to end that with a colon and then list in bulleted form what you need to know. Now again, with the body paragraph, we want to include bulleted information in the body paragraph, or detailed information. Let me say that again. We want to include detailed information in the body paragraph, but we can do it in bulleted form because we are doing technical communication, and we can use bullets and we can use headings and subheadings in this type of communication. Okay, and so that's my suggestion. If you have chosen to write everything out in paragraph form, that's not necessarily wrong. That could be just fine. But a good way to approach it is to begin with a lead-in sentence that ends with a colon, such as, I need the following information, and then list in bullet point format the information that you need. Okay, that's just one way that you can approach it. If you do it that way, make sure that you don't go past 5 bullet points, because at a certain point, it'll just be too many. Okay? All right, and then the conclusion paragraph, you want to wrap up with a goodwill closing, right? And again, that goodwill closing is a polite, professional, pleasant way to wrap up your communication. Okay? And you can begin with a thank you sentence. For example, thank you for your time. And then you can compliment his restaurant. If you want to do that, you can do it here. And then you can also make sure that you leave a phone number where you can be reached. Now, in our scenario, Mr. Luciano prefers to be contacted by letter. He doesn't have internet access and all of that. And so you're writing him this letter, but maybe you don't want to wait for the letter to return. And so he does use the phone. You can also leave your phone number with your, at the end of your letter in your conclusion paragraph. And then leaving that phone number, you can ask him to return your call, right, and get in touch with you that way. So hopefully this has been helpful with your good newsletter. And I have some other reminders and tips here. Again, this document is on D2L. Okay? Now, let's take a look at our bad newsletter. Bad news communication, we'll remember from the readings in the book, is a completely different kind of communication, right? With bad news communication, you have to be careful. You have to be very careful of how you handle it. You have to be mindful of your tone of voice in your writing, right? That comes through in your writing. You have to be very careful of your word choice, because sometimes it's just really sensitive. You may be communicating something that is really hard for your reader to hear. And so with our scenario here, you want to consider the fact that you are going to be communicating bad news to your audience. Here's just a general way to approach that. For bad news communication, you don't want to ever start with the bad news. Okay, in ABC format, you don't want to begin with the bad news. At the beginning of your communication, you want to start with some type of a goodwill, generalized opening. Okay, and so you can begin, for example, with a thank you sentence, okay, that acknowledges that you have received the communication from her, that you have read her letter or her messages, depending on the scenario you're working on. So just begin with that thank you sentence. Thank you for your messages. Thank you for your letter. Thank you for your request. Something like that would be a thank you sentence. And then in another sentence, you can provide an overview of the goal of your letter, right? And tell her why you're writing. So for example, I'm writing to respond to your request, or I'm writing to address your concerns. Again, it depends on which scenario that you're using. Now, I think I've only given you one scenario, but just make sure that you are looking at that scenario so that you know exactly what it is you're writing about. Okay? Then in the body paragraph, this is where we want to get into the bad news. You never want to deliver the bad news in the abstract. You never want to deliver the bad news in the conclusion. You want to keep your bad news smack dab in the middle. Okay? In the middle, so that you can begin on a positive note as best as you can, and you can end on a positive note as best as you can. But you never want to leave the reader with bad news or begin the letter with bad news. So one way you can start off this body paragraph is with the word unfortunately. Now sometimes students have asked me, well, can I say, um, I regret to inform you that. Well, yes, you could say that, but remember, in technical communication, we're trying to be concise, right? We're trying to use as few words as possible and get to the point just as quickly as we can. And so instead of saying, I regret to inform you, you could just say, unfortunately, right? And that one word, unfortunately, would take away all those other words, and it would be more concise. So just as a suggestion, you could use unfortunately to start your body paragraph. So it could read, for example, unfortunately, we cannot honor your request, or whatever, so just make a sentence of that. And then you can offer a brief explanation for your decision, okay? And don't write anything that would make the recipient feel as if his or her request was unreasonable or stupid or inconvenient for you to consider, or say anything that would blame the reader or make the reader intentionally try to feel bad. Okay, they probably feel bad enough, getting a bad news letter. So you don't want it to come across that you're annoyed with them, that you're angry with them. You want to maintain a professional tone. Okay, that's going to be your goal. So be very mindful of your tone. Now in the conclusion paragraph, as usual, you want to focus on goodwill. Okay, if your scenario is one where you're trying to send that letter to that student who requested to see the financial records, if that is your scenario, and if you offer to let her speak with someone in the accounting department, then you want to make sure that you provide that phone number and contact name for that person. If your scenario was a different one, perhaps where you're responding to someone from to a client who used your catering company, you can still end with a goodwill note. Okay, so you just want to, depending on your scenario that you have, you just want to make sure that you find a positive way to close it. It's not that you're trying to be super excited, because this is bad news communication, but just find a good professional way to close it. Okay, and keep in mind that your decision is final regardless of the scenario that you have. And so you don't really need to invite your reader to contact you to discuss it further. What you can say is, if you have questions or concerns, then, and if it's the scenario with your client, let me start over again. If it's a scenario that you're working on where it's your client and you're representing the catering company, you can say something like, if you have questions or concerns, you can reach me at this number. If your scenario is the one where you have the student that's writing to see the financial records, then your decision should definitely be final, right? There is nothing further to discuss. So make sure that you know which scenario that you're using, and that you wrap up in a goodwill manner. Okay, and so here again are some other reminders and tips that hopefully will be helpful for you as you work on this assignment. So I did say in our D2L class this week that I would be uploading another video about ABC format. You did have more than enough to go on to get started on the assignment. If you have already submitted it, you can submit it again if you want to do that. That's perfectly fine. I will grade the very last submission that you make. Okay, so let's say you submitted this 3 different times. I'll grade the one that was submitted most recently. And if you have questions, please let me know. I am happy to talk with you. I'm happy to help you figure out what it is you need to do. Remember, my office hours are on our homepage on D2L, and it's always nice to meet an online student. All right, well, I will talk with you all again soon. Take care, and hopefully this has been helpful.